Hello and welcome to Faith Talks. In today's program we'll be asking, why is Christianity so divisive? Joining me in the discussion and ready to share their views and opinions are Patrick Johnson and Sinisha Howard. Now, is Christianity not one religion, Patrick?
Yes, it is. Just like you have the Muslim faith, you have the Jewish faith, you've got Buddhism. Christianity is one religion, then, if you would like to put it that way. Yes, it is.
But why is it that there's so many different Christian churches then?
Oh, yeah, that's a bigger question, I guess. I would like to set the record straight, though. You know, many people that I've spoken with, especially those who don't have any or don't profess to have any religious faith, one of the questions they always come up with is this one: so why are there so many different denominations when all the other religions are all just the one? Yet when you do look into the other world religions, you'll find that they are just as divided as we are. There isn't just one Muslim faith. They are as split up as we are, and you'll find that through all the other religions too. And maybe that's a reflection of what we are like as human beings, I think. That really is the first stepping stone to understanding why there would be so many.
Yeah, and this is probably something that is deeply ingrained in human. We just do this. This is one prayer that we deny to Jesus. He prayed that we should all be one. He prayed for that, but we just seem not to follow that up so, literally as he hoped for us. But I think this is something that we have to deal with this. And I think also should be said that we should acknowledge this as Christians, that this is not the brightest moment of Christianity, that we indeed have a problem. They said we didn't follow up the message, the guidance that Jesus left for us.
Yes, I think it's true. The ideal was that we would be one. There's no doubt about it. That is Jesus's plan. The Bible mentions several times we are supposed to be one body. There's one faith, there's one Lord, one God. And so, that was Jesus's great prayer that we really have not helped to fulfill at all. So we have to admit that.
But clearly, as a Christian faith group, we've failed, because with over 38,000 different church groups or church affiliations, new churches, denominations, clearly there's more than one. How can they all join together, and why is it that there are so many?
What we're like as human beings. Because, as the Bible tells us, our fundamental problem is that we are selfish at heart. Call it sin if you like. And that means that I want to define things in my terms, and if it's not the way I like it, then I'll go away and form my own thing. So this selfishness really does lie at the bottom of all of this splitting up of religions, I think.
Yes, and I think while we have to acknowledge the shortcomings of Christians in that regard, but I think also we should acknowledge that there are differences that we are maybe not in control of. We come from a different cultures. Our language is different. Our habits are not necessarily the same, and this will affect how we practice Christianity. But that does not mean that we cannot still be one. And I think this is important, and this is difficult for people to discern, what is it that binds us together while acknowledging where we differ. And I think this is something that we need to.
But how can so many different churches, because obviously there must be differences, how can they be one? You talked about the unity that Jesus was promoting, and I always thought that was just within my own little denomination. Yeah. How can 38,000 be one?
I think it started sometime long time ago. There was a time in the early Christian movement, the church, when the Christians were guided by their faith in Christ. I think there is a fundamental difference with what is faith and what is belief. When we say that I have a faith in someone, I express my complete confidence. And I think that Christians were sharing that faith in Jesus Christ. And they had the two common things. They were breaking bread together at the baptisms. And I think this is what was binding them. Even though even in the Roman Empire, people were living far apart, and the communities often never got in touch with each other. So there was a differences, but what they shared in common was faith in Christ, faith that there is a God, faith that there is a one that I can complete trust in. What happened later, we have moved from a faith into belief sphere, and belief is opinion. Belief is different from faith in many ways. With belief, it's really basically about information, and we have deluded ourselves that we have the right information. We have the truth, forgetting that aspect of faith. And I think this is where we slowly drifted apart from Christians, and which caused so much differences and eventually big problems.
I think another thing we need to differentiate between unity and uniformity. Maybe it's not all bad news that there are 38,000 different types of denominations. God made us all very different. We're not all the same. We don't all look the same. And I think he tolerates more of these differences than perhaps we would want. Because when we're talking about unity, we're not saying everybody must be exactly the same and like exactly the same things and express things in the same manner. There is room and scope for different ways of perhaps expressing how you worship and those kinds of things. So there's a difference between unity and uniformity. There will never be uniformity. We won't all fit one mold. So there can be some differences there. But I think the unity, yes, is there a central idea that we could all gather around? Well, I think that one idea is Jesus.
Yes. And there is a problem in all of this, because we humans, we like superficial, we like visible, we like what is on the spot. This is why, some people are appalled that in some churches, maybe, in the Middle East or Asia, the utmost respect is to take the shoes off. In the West, you take the hat off, but it's a big deal to some of these Christians. And I think this shows that, that we are scratching the surface and we are playing on top. But what we really need to discover, that what is really that unites us, binds us together. And I think that ultimately it is Christ. This is the truth that should bind us together.
And I'm sure that is what should bind us together. I'm not going to be disagreeing with that. But you are also talking about that there is a cultural element, that we're drawn to perhaps congregate in groups that are like ourselves. Are we not then as Christians promoting segregation?
Yeah, that becomes a big challenge when you add the cultural mix to everything else. And it really does take a level of maturity, I think, to be able to differentiate between this is what I do in my culture, and this is what everybody else should do. Do we promote segregation then? Possibly we do, and we have done so. That's not a very healthy thing. So yes, it's a difficult question for many people to be able to separate their culture from, let's say, their religious beliefs. And it is something that you have to keep working with.
I think many people feel, I want to follow Christ because I have to be cozy, at peace. I want to be quiet, I want to have easy life. I want to pray for the goodies and stuff like that. But I think that what we must understand, when we decide to follow Christ, we are deeply challenged. And if you have not, at the point of meeting Christ, you have not been deeply and utterly challenged to, you have not met Him, somebody says. And I have discovered this, that, once you follow Christ, you can transcend the differences. You can embrace different things. From my personal experience, I remember when, as a Croatian, I was sent to an Afro-Caribbean church to work in London. And I can remember the first day I asked myself, what on earth I'm doing here? This is nothing like I know. The food is different. And I remember after 6 months I went on holiday back to Croatia, and everybody was amazed, are you working with, in a Caribbean church? How is that? Because, we have these stereotypes. They sing, they, dance and stuff like that. And I remember that first year, after 6 months, I would speak about the differences. I had stories to tell. There were so many things that they do different from us. Year later, I was still working in the same church. I came back on holiday and I met, I knew people that knew that I work in the Caribbean church, and they were curious, you know, how is it to work in a different culture? And I remember there was nothing for me to say, because everything was, you know, just as we do. What has happened is that through relationship that I had with these people, spending time together with them, I realized that all these differences are so superficial, and I think this is the work of God. This is what Jesus does when we decide to follow him.
Yeah, and it's a matter of coming to a place where we can celebrate the diversity rather than work against it and always be saying, yeah, they're so different to us, and putting up barriers. That really is where God wants to bring us, I think.
But Tanisha, I want to challenge you a little bit on that, because you're saying that you can transcend those differences once you've been challenged by God and have grown into a relationship. Then why are the churches still fighting among each other? Because
they don't want to transcend it. Simple as that, because they have this stereotype of what God is. God's supposed to justify their way of life, and this is why people argue, because usually the many Christians are not on the quest for truth. They are usually on the quest for security and comfort. And I think this is where we have to be challenged.
How would you challenge as a pastor to your members to remove that security and comfort?
Well, you talk about the values. What is that you want? We live in a broken world. We live in a world where nothing is quite right, and we often are like, you know, the best illustration, we just float in a fast river. But you know, the Christianity, Christ challenges us. Why would you go with the flow? Why, you know in your heart what you want it to be. You know, the truth is that when we were children, we dreamt about beautiful things, what we wanted to become, you know, when we grow up. The sad truth is that almost very few of us actually lived to fulfill the dream. And the invitation from Christ is, no, you can. You know, stop in that flow and turn on the other side. Turn around and change it. And I think Christianity is about change. Christianity is about new life. It is about doing things differently. And this requires quite a lot of a pain, maybe sometimes, you know. We live in a tension, and that's what sin actually is, living in a tension. On one side, we want to go the old way, but Christ is kind of challenging us. And I think that's the beauty, that's the quest. Quest is not about sitting in a sofa. Quest is actually going out in the mountains.
Yes, there's an interesting story in the Bible where where Jesus is talking, and one of the disciples says to him, "We saw somebody who was doing some of your stuff, who was, you know, teaching and healing people, and we told him to stop because he's not one of us." And Jesus says, "Don't stop him. You know, just because he's not part of this group doesn't mean to say that he's against me. He's doing the same kinds of things as I am. So accept him, encourage him, let him keep going." And I think that's the challenge Jesus keeps saying to us. Okay, you can define yourself as you are, but when you see others moving by the same kind of spirit, you've got to then expand and try and understand and incorporate what they're doing as well with your own self.
And the other thing is, you know, people expect to find God in holy books, you know, in visions and dreams, but we meet, and more often than not, God in other human beings. Because this is how God likes to manifest himself. You know, we like to say, Christ is in me, so let him then, you know, speak through me. And I think we meet people, and this is where we want, we look forward, we find it not only challenging, but something that inspires us. And this is how we learn about God, about reality, about future and hope.
Well, let's have a look at what some young people have said about the topic, why is Christianity so divisive?
I don't think Christianity is the problem. I think it's the people themselves.
Many people are following other people, basically, and then kind of create their own church, which is kind of not even a church, but maybe a group of people following the same leader and not exactly following Bible and Jesus.
I think mainly because a lot of people turn personal issues into theological issues. I think there are a lot of stylistic issues that people think, well, actually it's a theological issue, so they kind of tend to fight over things which is just based on personal preference.
Basically, they're thinking, I'm right, you're wrong, and that's the kind of approach we take to other Christians and vice versa. So that's probably one of the main ones, but there are other factors as well.
We interpret the Bible, and different people have different interpretation of the same text sometimes. So in that sense, if we believe we're right in how we interpret the Bible, we'll have different opinions, to other people who read the same Bible.
That was some young people we were listening to there who have all chosen to stay pretty much in the same denomination. But isn't it that Christianity is really about being selfish? Because the divisiveness comes because it's all about me and my interpretation of God and God's word. And that's why we have so many churches as a result.
It can seem that way. And maybe we would have to admit that sometimes the way in which we put forward belief in Jesus is all about what do you like and what are your preferences, etc. But in a sense, what we have to do is get away from that. I know today we have very much a shopping mentality when it comes to church. Which one do you choose? Does it have a good children's program? So I'll go there, or like going to the shopping center. But that's not really what the basis is supposed to be. It is meant to be about belief in Jesus and choosing him. And that means moving away from what I want to who God is, and then wanting to, well, as you've talked about before, a relationship, wanting to please him. So we need to move from the it's all about me to it really is about my relationship with God, and it's all about what God wants for me.
But I think we should also, not to be too negativistic, because we should appreciate the personal experience, the emphasis, or not just a person, but maybe a nation. I have heard of this story of the person who wanted to commit a suicide, and just before he was about to do it, he found a book of Gospel of John. And he just said, okay, let me just have a, I have time. So he read it, and as he was reading, he forgot about, and he changed his mind. And he was so impressed, he converted to the point where he decided not just to get baptized, but he also became a minister. But his problem was that, he would say, forget about everything, it's the book of John, Gospel of John. So he was so emphasizing book of John that, people were getting a bit fed up with him, because you should look at the others. But no, for him what worked was this. And I think this is something in us as well. When we, you may say it's selfish, but it's not necessarily selfish. There is something that you had profoundly been touched with something, and you tend to, well, I should say maybe overemphasize, but it might look to you, but to me it was something life-saving experience. And I think this is also what makes people emphasize different things, not just selfishness, but also that deep experience that we had with a certain aspect of their faith.
But then again, we are saying that it's all about God, but the fractions among the churches surely must come out of a human aspect.
Yes, I think that it is a reflection of that. Again, maybe part of it could have its origin in who God is. If you go way back into the first part of the Bible, there is this story of Noah and the flood. And apparently before the flood, everybody spoke the same language. But afterwards, God wanted them divided up because together they were really rebellious. So it's almost as if God wanted some divisiveness to keep us under control. Maybe that plays in there as well. Yes, there is the selfishness, there's no doubt about it. But I think God tolerates more diversity than perhaps we would give him credit for.
But if I come to you as a pastor, I feel I've been touched. I might have been the person who opened the Gospel of John, read it through, and want to have a relationship with God and with Jesus. And I come to you and say, well, I'm looking at all these 38,000 churches. Where do I go? How do I choose? How do I know which one is right? Because they all say they're based in the Bible. Yeah,
if you came to me, I'd say, come to my church. No.
Well, you should do, shouldn't you? You are a pastor.
In a sense, yes. I think maybe there should be some principles that you'd want to start doing. Looking at, I would say, you've got to kind of understand what's in the Bible. Any church that would be teaching the opposite of what's in the Bible, or something, you know, that goes against what God says, then I would be very wary of that kind of a church. I don't know if you would agree with that. As a first kind of a principle, they need to be accepting the Bible for what it teaches. A second thing I would say is, do they accept Jesus as central to who we are as Christians? Because that perhaps would differentiate between maybe someone who's a Christian or someone who belongs to some kind of a sect that seems like it might be Christian. Because Jesus has to be central in our teachings, right? Other principles, I would perhaps look at some of the fruits of what they do. I know that's somewhat of a difficult thing, but even Jesus himself said, by their lives, by their fruits, you'll know whether or not they're wolves in sheep's clothing, or whether they are the real deal. So surely they should be practicing what they're preaching. Those are some of the things I would have thought of.
Yes.
What do you mean by fruits? I have to stop you there.
Yeah, fruits or actions. How do they treat others? You know, if they're talking about love, how do you treat those who disagree with you? That's a great acid test. You know, it's easy to love those who agree with me, but how do you treat those who don't agree with you? That is a really good test for how loving someone is.
Yeah, the slight problem is that I don't know of the Christian denomination that would say, you know, well, we don't guide ourselves by the Bible. All of them profess that, you know, the inspiration, the guide, and the authority is Bible. So how do you go about dealing with this? I can also point out to at least two things, one that you mentioned already, but the first, well, God really works in mysterious ways. I was raised as a agnostic. I was completely uninterested. And I remember when I was a teenager, somebody cracked a joke at me and he said, "You are going to be a priest," because I was in a Catholic kind of background, you know. And I remember how offended I was by that, you know. I was ready to fight with him, you know. No way, because to me that was so backwards, so last century, something like that, you know, embarrassing thing. And look at me, you know, a few years later, it was exactly that, what happened. How that happened? You know, a lot to it I cannot ascribe. I just see that there was some power that I think I'll learn the whole eternity about, you know, how this happened. But you know, the experience when you see that this works for you, this is very important. But the other bit is there, you know, I think Bible actually says itself, you know, James, book of James says, you know, the true religion is this: feed the poor, help the widows and orphans. And if you have a church that really pays attention to this, you know, the doctrines are important, and I love the doctrines of my church, but they describe my experience. You know, we know that the doctrines are not the truth. We don't claim that they are dogmas, but they describe, you know, my experience that I have with God. They make sense of what I live and what I make out of my experience with Jesus. And I believe that this is it. And the Bible kind of is there, you know, and this is very important. You keep an open mind because you allow, you know, the Bible to speak to you. The problem often is that we are clouding our judgment by our background, by our preferences, by our selfishness. And I think the art is to allow God at first, you know, to have this open mind, so that to allow the Bible to speak to you. Yes. And that's what I found in my church. I think in my church I found that fulfillment. And I humbly, you know, I don't want to say, you know, I believe there is always something that I will learn, and my church has to learn many things. But I from my experience, from my where I came from, the walk, the relationship that I have, I just feel that, you know, this counts. And the Bible, when I compare, when I study, it tells me that this is what I should believe. This is what is in me.
But coming from an agnostic background and suddenly becoming a priest, you know, there has to be having a conversion experience in between. And how, Tanisha, how did you choose which denomination?
Well, you know what? I think something interesting is that they say that, actually the Bible says that the faith is a gift from God. We like to think, You know, it is us who make often decisions. But what we know from the Bible, that it is God who gives us our gift. I like to go to a when I go to haircut, I don't like haircuts basically, but when I go, and usually, you know, these people try to chat you up. They try to kind of say, you know, things, and I kind of like to play with this, you know. So they ask me, are you having a day off? I said no. Are you having a break? I say no. You know, are you busy on weekend? Very busy, I say, you know, and stuff. And they finally ask, so who are you? And I like to say, I'm a priest, you know. I mean, and you know, it's kind of, oh, you know, it's like when you say you are a Jew or something like that, you know. People find it very interesting because they talk, but they don't often meet. But then they say to me, I don't believe in God. I said, are you sure of that? Do you believe in justice? Do you believe in those beautiful things that we should treat each other fairly? And they say, yes, I do, but that's what my God represents. This is what I stand for. This is what God is all about. It's not the person with white bird and I don't know. This is what it is, and I think this is where we start. This is the point where we journey. Now, I know the question you ask. I believe that my church provides these opportunities. I don't want to say that people in other denominations don't find many of these things, but I can say with all my heart that when I read the Bible, when I get what I know about Jesus, I think that the journey that I go, I would like to take you with me to meet Him, and my church provides that venue the best, and I want to share that with people.
Yeah, I think added to that as well, again, kind of talking about my own church, what denomination or whatever church you're looking at, is it making sense of what's going on in the world right now? How is it interpreting what's happening? What kind of things is it trying to say about the future? Because I think they're fairly important questions as well to be looking at too.
Well, thank you guys for joining me in the studio today for this discussion. And why not add your voice to the debate by joining us on Facebook at Faith Talks. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.